This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Cannabinoid Nation.
Starting, managing, and scaling a cannabis or hemp business is highly complex, from keeping up with regulatory compliance to the importance of having adequate equipment such as water systems, lighting, nutrients, etc. Operators face challenges on the daily that can be overwhelming and in most cases not the best use of their time. Fortunately, the team of consultants and specialists at Cannabinoid Nation provide best-in-class industry solutions that aim to increase the likelihood of success for growers, processors, and manufacturers. Cannabinoid Nation is the industry's premier brokerage and consulting firm that helps cannabis and hemp operators with grow assessment consulting, white label, e-commerce, website design, website development, and digital marketing services. The company also has trusted relationships with retail buyers to ensure that growers and manufacturers they represent get the best price for their high-quality products. Visit their website to learn more about their industry solutions at cannabinoidnation.com. Cannabinoid Nation, the cannabis industry's premier brokerage and consulting firm. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guests today are Bryan Fields and Kellan Finney. They're co-founders of Eighth Revolution and hosts of the Dime podcast.
Yeah, well, you could do.
Yeah, we're just gonna have fun with this episode. So,
Good.
For those listening, we got Bryan Fields on and Kellan Finney. They are the co-founders of Eighth Revolution and the hosts of the Dime podcast. And Bryan and Kellan and I, we were just kind of joking around because the podcast world, man, it's new for all of us, right? I mean, did you guys have a podcast before you started the Dime, or
No. So
No?
in simplest terms, Kellan and I were doing tons of trade shows. Like if there was a trade show anywhere in the United States and sometimes like local, you would find us there navigating the whole thing. Kellan was on a ton of the panels. So during the pandemic, we were looking for ways to stay fresh and to kind of keep ourselves going. And then we started just recording episodes because during our mid meetings, I would just be challenging him on questions, just trying to figure out what's going on, just to kind of dissect it. And our opinions are similar but so different, right? Like Kellan's got the heavy science background, I've got the heavy marketing side, and we overlap on some things, but others very differently.
And that's like brings out the best in the conversation, right? Is when you have either opposing views where they're not fighting, but they're kind of building on each other's thoughts, or if they're just in different disciplines like you and Kellan are. I mean, that just adds more flavor to it.
Yeah,
so
I think keep going, Kellan.
No, go ahead.
So when we started recording the episodes, like we were just recording them just to listen, right? And then a couple of the industry contacts were like, "Yo, send it to me." We're like, "All right, cool. We'll just post it." And then one of our episodes, like 100x, like what we were doing, and I was like, "Who is listening to this? Like, where did this go viral? Like, is this on Reddit or something like that?" So we just started just putting it out, and the feedback has been pretty nice. And as you know, Kevin, you're doing an amazing job with it. It's a process, and it's one of those where we've gotten better every day, and it's a fun experience. So that's the best part about it.
It definitely is. Kellan, what did you want to add to that? I know you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that like the conversations from like a interdisciplinary standpoint in terms of like people bringing different perspectives is always what breeds innovation and kind of some of the best dialogue. I mean, you hear CEOs talk about like diverse teams and all of these other things, right? And like that's literally what I think it's just hitting the nail on the head, is just people with completely different experiences and backgrounds coming together and having conversations is really what drives industries forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows the appetite for cannabis knowledge, right? Like you guys mentioned, you were at the trade shows, like you were heavily involved in the industry prior, and then you decided you had to pivot like most businesses did during the pandemic, right? So you went more digital, more virtual with the podcast, and boom, people are listening. And it's like, and that's kind of the same thing that I experienced as well, as like, you know, because that pulling the trigger initially and doing your first episode is a bit nerve wracking. You know, you're
Sure.
you know, like I don't like the way I sound. Am I going to say something stupid? Am I going to get canceled for saying something wrong? Like, you know, there's all these different things that go through your head. But once you get comfortable with it, you kind of feel your own style, right?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect way to describe it. And, for us, it's just getting better every day. Every episode is a new opportunity to talk about a new subject. And, for at least from my standpoint, and I really know nothing. Every day the industry is exploding, and all I can do is just try to consume and to learn and to lean on experts like Kellan and yourself, Kevin, on what's going on and ask really targeted questions and figure out what I don't know.
Yeah, no, same, man. I feel the same way. And that's relevant for this discussion today, because I was recently on y'all's podcast, The Dime, and had such a great time. And we had such a informative and, just in-depth conversation about all things cannabis. And so we had to bring it back today on the Cannabinoid Connect podcast and have you guys on. So for those listening, I feel like today's episode will kind of be a little bit all over the place, but it'll all be relevant with what's currently trending and happening within the cannabis industry. So Bryan and Kellan, let's first kick it off with what's top of mind for you guys. I know that you've had different guests on your show. What has been something that's really interested you, and something that you want to dive deeper on today?
You go first, Kellan.
You sure you don't want to talk about New York, Ryan? I mean, it's kind of a big deal. I mean, like, I don't want to steal your thunder. You might have been waiting a whole lifetime for something like this.
New York is the big news right now, man.
Yeah, I mean, from a New York standpoint, it's eye-opening, and a conversation that I've been having all the time really recently is people want to know is flower and joints is what people think about when they think about kind of the cannabis industry, and we've talked about it a bunch of times. And what I'm most excited about are the people who are going to get it from the medicinal standpoint, the educational standpoint, the kind of the one-to-ones out there, the mints that you can take, the beverages, the endless opportunity of the 1.5 million different products that are about to hit the shelves, where people are going to be like, I didn't know cannabis could do this. I didn't know I could have a psychoactive product or a non-psychoactive product. And that is really what I'm most excited about from the East Coast standpoint. I've been fortunate enough to visit a ton of dispensaries on the West Coast and kind of have Kellan as a guide of telling me how this works. And the experience is exciting, a little overwhelming in my opinion, from a standpoint. But where we're going is so in the early stages, and where we're going to be 5-6 years from now is just so exciting.
Do you think, I mean, New York is huge. It's massive, right? And California's market is massive. Is New York gonna overtake California? Are they gonna rival? Like, you're in New York firsthand, Bryan. So tell us what to expect from a market perspective.
I can't even imagine what it'll be. And from like a revenue standpoint, we're talking about a market that is untapped, right? And that when it comes online, there'll just be market share that was not available before. Now it's accessible. And the operators who are in this space are going to have an opportunity to claim real revenue immediately. And it's going to be game changing for the space, for the operators. And it's just another feather in the cap for the industry to say, like, this isn't going anywhere. Like, this is locked in, and it's only a matter of time now before we get it everywhere.
Right. Just to add on to the New York conversation, I've seen on Twitter, I know we're all part of the MSO gang, and a lot of people tweeting about New York legal cannabis being priced in. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think people know. I think the markets are moving in negative directions, as we've both seen, and it's just been horrendous to see. I don't think it's been priced in. I mean, but those are conversations that really well-informed, educated people with a lot at risk are making decisions on. Like the Green Thumb news today came out. Does that have anything to do with everything that's going on? Maybe. But at the end of the day, I think what's most important to me, and what I've continued to stress to our clients, and we've kind of put this out in our April report that's going to get released really soon, is that forward is forward. Mm-hmm. And that no matter the speed you move, as long as you're continuing to check the box in every single day and move in the right direction, you're making substantial progress. And sure, it's not the massive gains we wanted where everything is federally legal from the timeline that we want in all the states and everything is perfect, but that's not how the world works.
Right.
We take one step at a time, we make progress, substantial progress, right? New York is substantial progress. Safe would be a huge step. And then after that, let's keep going. Uplisting, next, 280E, next. Let's keep it moving. Let's keep adding to the momentum. Let's keep moving positive forward, and let's get all the people that are in jail out. Like let's move on with that social justice.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Forward is forward, man. Well said, for sure. And Kellan, tell us about, what's top of mind for you. Again, you both are the co-hosts of the Dime podcast. So what's been really interesting in your world?
Yeah, so I just want to kind of keep on the New York conversation. I think that one thing that New York will benefit from a timing standpoint is a lot of these big companies have been out experimenting on how to run a successful cannabis operation, at least in other states, right? So like I talked to a lot of people in Illinois when the Illinois market first came online a year ago, right? And they were like, the product's bad. It's priced too high. I'm just going to go back to my kind of traditional market standpoint, right? And so I think with the experience that the Crescos and the Curaleaves and all these big companies have had in these other states is going to be benefit for the New York market, right? And so forward is forward, and I think New York is going to benefit from the pitfalls that these larger companies faced in the other states, right? And so hopefully, right, New York is going to get a higher quality product right out of the get-go. The consumers are going to be a lot happier. The industry as a whole understands that delivery is really important for fighting that kind of line in the sand of the traditional market versus the established and regulated market, right? Which I think is going to be a battle that's going to be slow, right? But I think that at the end of the day is one of the biggest take-home messages for New York that a lot of people aren't really factoring into kind of that dialogue, from my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good call out. And New York is massive and huge, like we've talked about. But then there's also other states that are up for voting, right, for adult use. I know New Mexico is one. I just released the podcast today with the co-sponsor of HB 12, Javier Martinez. I know that they called a special session to get that through. And then we've got other states like I think Virginia and Connecticut as well, right? Am I missing any?
New Jersey just did it. Rhode Island, Pennsylvania. I know the governor of Pennsylvania is pretty active, I believe, on communicating things. I think it's a domino effect. I think
Yeah.
New York was like, all right, well, if New Jersey's done this, our window has to happen now, because if we're losing tons and millions of dollars to cross a bridge, that's money we'll never see. So we don't have a choice. We have to do this. We have to do this now. And I think when New Jersey went rec, you saw the legislative process kind of kick into a second gear, be like, all right, like we got to stop messing around. Like this has to happen now.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys real in tune with like the specific kind of rollouts of these regulated programs when it comes to adult use cannabis? And I'm asking because if so, like what states are really doing it right and could be kind of a leading example for other states that are coming online?
I mean, we could talk about some of the conversations that the Virginia legislatures had recently about not being able to purchase cannabis until 2024, right? Like, did you see that?
I did not see that. No. So they want to pass it now and then wait 4 years for sales to actually happen?
Yeah, in January they passed it and they said 2024. And then I think it was like either last week or the week before, he was like, 6 months. We'll do it in 6 months. I'm just like, what sort of time frame are you operating on, sir? And that's why I respect that though, right? He was like, all right, 3 years, let's just get it in. And then he's like, actually, he's like, we got these people to the table. Like, by the way, I made a mistake. We're doing it in 6 months. So like, figure it out and figure it out fast.
Right. Well, and and this is not, I'm this next point, I'm not calling anyone out here, but to that example, like with that discussion with Javier Martinez, there's so many unknowns with these states because this is all new territory, right? And when I asked the question of projected revenue, because I think I saw a number of what HB 12 would bring in, and that's like 318 million for the state. And he's like, well, I saw that number, but then I also saw 50 million and I saw 600 million. And so they had really no grasp of what type of revenue that was going to come in. And that was kind of surprising to me. And there wasn't really a concrete plan as to like where those funds are going to go, right? Is it public education? Is it infrastructure? And it just sounded like they're going to lump it all into a pile and kind of decide what they do with it after, which I don't see other states doing,
No. I mean, that's not what made Colorado's market so successful. And I think that, I mean, of course, I'm a Colorado local, so I'm going to be biased, right? But I think that like what they did with a lot of the revenue in terms of benefiting education and the state infrastructure, and that was the plan from like that, those clauses and aspects of the bill were written in that helped it actually pass, right? In my,
Right.
at least from my conversations and experiences with like some of the older generations. Like I remember back in the day, I was talking to my parents, I was still in college, and they were talking about voting on it, and my mom was like, I'm gonna vote for it because it's gonna benefit our education system, right? And those kind of things were planned out. And so I think a lot of these other states had really just been so against it. And then, like we've said before, that it's a money thing, right? Like the pandemic, and then it's going to bring in tax revenue. So then everyone is just now rushing to the table to kind of get these things pushed through. And they're not taking the time to do their homework and looking at what's been successful in other states. You know what I mean? Which is, it's kind of a shame, but it is what it is, right? It forwards forward.
Right. Right. We're gonna keep saying forwards forward. Bryan, you set the theme of this episode for that. So I love it.
I've been rocking that one for pretty hard, and you'll see that even harder over the next couple of days. I did want to add one point though, like regards to like projected revenue. What is that number? And I think the reason it's so hard to forecast is because like what type of adoption comes with that, right? Like, are we talking about smokers who no longer consume cannabis, no longer consume tobacco, moving into cannabis? Alcohol drinks, no longer consuming alcohol. Like there's adoption like that. That'll happen. That'll kind of steal from one category and add to another. So I think when you're talking about like total projected revenue size, it's got to be nearly impossible to forecast what an actual number would look like accurately because there's so many unknown variables.
Right. You know what? And to add to that point, it's like what's amazing about the plant, right, is that it touches so many different people and from so many different demographics. So, like your example of transitioning from, say, like alcohol to cannabis, sure, that is an example. But then you've also got different formulations of these products. You've got older people that are rubbing it on their shoulders, and you've got young college kids who are hitting bongs, right?
Right.
So, like to add to what you're saying, it is so complex to forecast that because you don't know how many people are going to come from the illicit market within the adult use. We don't know how many people are going to move from alcohol to cannabis, as you mentioned. And so, I mean, I guess it's safe to say that you bet higher, you know, you kind of forecast more, which is not usually a best practice in business. But I think that it's not going to be a surprise to me, but I think that a lot of people are going to be surprised about how many consumers of cannabis there are in this country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And how many different types of applications there are and how many different, let's say, entry points there possibly is, because it's not that after work. It doesn't have to just be that after work joint or the bong rip, you know, for the college kids. There's so many different opportunities, from sleep to kind of medicinal benefits from like Crohn's disease. There's so many endless opportunities for the plant to do medicinal benefits. And how do they account that versus like total rev size, medicinal versus rec? Kind of gets a little hazy, but at the end of the day, very optimistic. I think the space is absolutely exploding, and we're still here in the first, which is really the exciting part, is that like we're in the infancy stage, and every month there's like multiple historic events moving us in the right direction. And for some of the people out there that are kind of frustrated at the speed that it's not happening that they want, I understand, and I wish we could go faster too. But at the same breath, like think about how far we've come. Think about that. Like we've got multiple states. We just got New York online. We're close to safe banking. Like we are just beginning to really accelerate forward.
Yeah. And I would also say, look to the leaders of the industry and how they're composing themselves, right? These people, Jason Wild, Ben Kovler, you know, Kim Rivers, they've been in this space for a long time, and they've seen it all kind of play out, the ups and downs. And so, um, you know, that they're kind of a good representation of what's happening, right? And kind of how to navigate through these waters, because like you said, we don't live in a perfect world. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But I think that they're a good kind of, you know, role models, I guess, if you will, lack of a word, to look toward in terms of their composure. You know, I want to talk to you guys about the political hypocrisy we're seeing at the federal government level, right? So, you know, we saw Vice President Kamala Harris with Biden, you know, when they were running, and Kamala was very vocal about, you know, cannabis reform and expungement of records and social justice. Biden, not so much. He was kind of quieter in that issue. But now we've seen the last week play out where he fired 5 staffers for previous cannabis use, not even like they tested for it within that 60 or 90 day window, right? So, and he's doubled down on that action today, because I just read from Marijuana Moment that his views on opposition, when asked, have not changed. So, what game are we playing right now at the political level, and what are the implications, you guys think?
I mean, it's politics at its best, right? I mean, I think that that's probably the like chalk it up as like one of the premier.
Right.
This is what I'm gonna do. Thanks for electing me. Now this is what I'm really gonna do.
Do you think if they're playing that game, do you think that like the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Brooker, like they can be that pressure on the administration to get this through? Like, do you think they're talking at all? And I'm not asking because I know, I mean, I'm just asking hypothetically. We don't know the right answer. You know what I
Totally.
mean? But this is all speculation. So,
I mean,
what do you guys think?
my speculative opinion is that it's kind of a give and take situation. Maybe that pleases some individuals on the other side of the aisle to help kind of push maybe his infrastructure bill that he's been drafting up. Maybe that there's a motive behind it that, hey, if you do this and kind of help us drive this message by firing these people with these previous convictions, then we'll kind of help you push this infrastructure bill forward, because I know that's a huge thing that he was preaching about. So it could be some sort of game like that if we're speculating. I mean, what are your thoughts, Bryan?
It's tough, right? I'm just going to take a straight shot guess. I think give and take is a really good point, and I, wonder if President Biden is having to adhere to certain type of rules, even though maybe he is interested in legalizing down the road. At this moment, right now, it is federally legal, and while I don't agree he should fire them for that, the rules in DC are different, and unfortunately, the people that are headed to adhere to those jobs suffered consequences that I don't agree with. I think they should still have their roles. I don't think anyone should be fired for those reasons, especially given where we see the direction. But at the end of the day, I think it's kind of two sides, right? The states are making the decisions for the states. DC
Right.
kind of operates for DC, and within DC, it's federally legal, and because of that, they had to terminate those people, which I think again is unfortunate.
Yeah, no, I see your point, and I agree. I agree that I don't agree with what took place, and I use the word hypocrisy to that point because to fire those staffers, and then you have his former boss, President Obama, admit to consumption while in office. As that fired staffer, I would just have just a salty outlook and just a bad taste in my mouth with the whole thing. And I do agree with what you're saying, Kellen. I think it is a lot of give and take, right? Because that's really what ultimately politics is. It's like you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Whatever we can do to push legislation, if I need to side with different viewpoints, or so there's probably a lot of that going on. But it is encouraging to see Chuck Schumer, Brooker continually advocating and committing to cannabis reform and ultimate legalization.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, right? Like, how many people in the world, after a really, really stressful day, they turn to cannabis as like a relief mechanism, right? And like, if you think about it, the president of the United States likely has a lot on his desk, and in those moments, pretty stressful opportunities. So maybe he did want to kick back instead of crushing a couple glasses of some whiskey. He was like, I'm just going to roll up a little joint from one of my favorite dispensaries. But like, it's just unfortunate that I go through that, and you know, it's sad, but at the same time, hopefully those people land on their feet pretty quickly.
Yeah. I want to ask you guys your thoughts on this, because this is one of the biggest frustrations in my eyes when it comes to the cannabis space, and even just having regular conversations with people who are not as up to speed as to the all the benefits of cannabis and kind of how it's different than other substances, right? And it's that point. It's like how cannabis gets clumped in to all these different narcotics due to the Schedule One listing. Like, does that bother you guys at all when people come out and say just crazy claims and just different things? I know, Kellen, you're on the science side of it and whatnot, and it just bothers me so much when they say these things, and I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Have you ever tried cannabis? Have you ever? Because what you're explaining is not in any way the experience that I've had or that anyone else has had. You know?
Yeah, and it's frustrating for sure, especially from like what technically according to like the federal law, if it's a Schedule One narcotic, it has no medicinal benefits. And then there's just this copious amount of scientific evidence, and it's continuing to build. Like there is an insane amount of publications happening every single year on the scientific front that, oh, turns out there's this whole entire system inside of the human body that cannabinoids interact with are bad, right? Like it's just frustrating. And like, to be honest with you, I always have to kind of go back to a classic novel when I have these conversations, which is like How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? And at the end of the day, like I could have that conversation till I turn blue in the face with people from a scientific perspective and like referencing articles and showing data. But at the end of the day, like they're going to believe what they want to believe. And I'm not going to change their mind, right? And there's going to be, it's not going to benefit the cultural stigma, me sitting there and yelling at someone that, hey, pot is the greatest thing ever. Like you should go smoke pot, right? Like, so it's frustrating. It really is. And I think the only way to really combat that is just to, it's that slow marathon, right? We were talking about earlier. It's just going to be a marathon of slowly, continuously, consistently putting out the right information and continually educating as many people as we can about the benefits of the plant and the true medical qualities. And I mean, not to mention all of the other benefits from a psychological and mental health perspective and stress relief. And I mean, what they say, stress is one of the number one causes of heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It turns out cannabis relieves stress. So like, there's just a ton of benefits that we've just begun to scratch the surface, right? So it's a really, really, really frustrating conversation. I've seen it decrease significantly over the course of the 7 years cannabis has been legal in Colorado. I remember first Thanksgiving I had working in the industry, I could not tell people what I did, or else it was like a really, really awkward conversation. And now people are like coming up to me and asking me like questions. And so it's really changed from a social perspective. I mean, I bet Bryan, I mean, how was your Thanksgiving this year? It's got to be a completely different situation out there on the East Coast still.
Well, we've always been very green friendly, and Thanksgiving is one of our favorite holidays because it turns out if you consume cannabis, it really helps with consuming more food as well. That's a natural pairing there.
You're gonna go for a long walk with your cousins. You'll be back, right?
We've migrated that now. It's full adoption, so it sits there right outside, and we come back in. And some of those stories, man, those are really hard, especially with my parents asking me like if I dove into the pool real quick for like a quick swim and my eyes were just bloodshot red 5 minutes ago. Like, not really sure what happened, just really hungry for round two, if we're gonna be honest. But to Kellan, I got a question for you, man. You know, like you were saying, I 100% agree, right? Like we got to release information. I wonder, do we need to do a better job educating doctors, right? Because doctors communicate information to their patients medicinally, and if they're not understanding what's going on from the endocannabinoid system, like how can we expect the patients to? And if you're, let's say you're an older fellow and you take all these pills every single day, and your doctor's like, hey, like I put some of these CBG, CBC, and a couple other cannabinoids into like a little, you know, pill for you. This is what you should take every Tuesday. It helps with recovery, your arthritis, and like your inflammation. Do you think that helps kind of shift it on? I mean, like, how far are we from that thought process?
I mean, doctors got to teach doctors at the end of the day. Like, doctors aren't going to take anecdotal evidence, and doctors aren't really going to listen to people who have put their medical license in jeopardy to go out and do these kind of illegal research projects. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, in order to change doctors' opinions, you're going to have to change the American Medical Society's opinion. Right. And like, that is just, I mean, it'll happen. I truly believe it, but it's going to take, that's going to be a significantly steeper hill to climb. I mean, it's going to be a much more challenging. You're talking about changing I mean, I think I've read something recently where the endocannabinoid system isn't even taught in medical schools right now.
That blows my mind. I still can't believe that. And
right?
And and like, I know this sounds stupid when I say this, but like you can Google the word. It's like a literal word to Google now. So anybody, like, it's published. We have this in our body, yet it's not talked about. You know, it's crazy to me.
Do you think they didn't talk about it because they just didn't know? They didn't have any information on it? I mean, they just like kind of like, yep, this is important, but don't know anything.
I would like to believe that that's the reason, but I just, based on the industry, that's probably not really what the motive behind it not being listed in the medical textbooks, right? Like, this has been a campaign for the last 100 years on the prohibition of cannabis. Like, blackouts on primary literature. I mean, we were talking to Dr. Matt Moore, and he was referencing a paper from like the 1930s because they wouldn't publish anything else between 1930 and 1965. So like, I would like to believe it's by accident, but my gut tells me it's probably not.
Right. Well, and Kellan, to add on to what you're saying, like the whole medical society would have to change their mindset and be more open to the plant, right? But then you've also got like the feeder programs, the universities, the colleges, like the whole curriculum would have to change at that point as well, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we are starting to see that. So I'm a part of the American Chemical Society, which is it's an integral part of almost every single university from a chemistry educational standpoint, right? And they actually have a subdivision. It's not a real division yet, but it's politics. We'll get there, right? But there is a subdivision that's focused on cannabis, right? It's called ACS Can, and they're slowly but surely starting to change that dialogue. And I mean, I had one of my old PIs at the university I went to reach out, and she has a student interested in trying to do some research. And so you can slowly see it starting to bleed through, right? It'll be a matter of time, hopefully, but there are organizations that are starting that fight, but it's going to be a very long battle.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, along with all the other fights, right, to move the needle, it's just chalk that up to another one. But hey, we're here. We're here to stay too, you know, because of how passionate we are and how much we understand the benefits of the plant. So it's worth the fight. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about more trends that we're seeing in the industry. We talk a lot about data in our day and age, right? I mean, ever since the tech boom in the early 2000s, everything's data driven. So why don't you guys share with me your thoughts on the importance of being data driven when operating a cannabis business or just being in the cannabis space?
Sure, and I think that's like kind of the perfect overlap of Kellan and I's experiences, where our core focus and what we really set out to do is to optimize the manufacturing space where real-time data can be collected by processors so that they can make informed decisions on the fly without sending it off to a lab to understand, okay, like we need to tweak these parameters. We had someone on our podcast the other day who was explaining to us how valuable that was to make those tweaks in real time so that he can really increase his yield. And you know, when we go to these facilities and we ask people how they make their decisions, and they're like, well, we have our SOPs and we follow it. And it's like, well, what happens if a variable's off? How do you check throughout the process? You know, your end product, once you produce that, it's even harder to kind of go back through it and to tweak the parameters. So from what we've really set out to do is to kind of really dig deeper. What we always tend to do is ask the questions, right? Understand how do people make decisions, and then to really dig deep, how do we do a better job of understanding what's going on in real time? And I think that starts with adding process analytical technology into the space to really understand in real time what is happening so that you can make informed decisions and tweaks to improve your efficiency.
And when you talk about that technology, you're talking about basically like supply chain management systems where you're able to see end to end, like you have control over your SOPs, as you mentioned, your cultivations, state regulations if you're operating in multiple states, like just having a bird's eye view of all that data and then having it be streamlined, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I would say this is like the second phase or the second wave of the cannabis industry, right? The first wave, if you compare it to kind of like the internet or the .com bubble, is everyone got in. If you could end up with cannabis in your hands, then you were operating in the space, and there's a good chance that you could make money by just having the ability to either grow cannabis or have it to extract it, right? And now after that kind of excitement and like everyone's realized, oh, it turns out that you can't just show up and be a billionaire overnight. Now, like in order to optimize all of these, you're going to need to build you need to optimize your margins and increase those margins. And the way to do that is to just like, we're not reinventing the wheel here, right? Like
Right.
we've been manufacturing foods and drugs as a human society for a really long time. And there's been some tremendous breakthroughs in the last 30 years with the use of spectroscopy and computers and integrating those two into manufacturing assembly lines, right? And so you're just pulling a card out of manufacturing that's applied on all of these other industries, right? In order to kind of build that smart factory, right? Like this type of technology is what separated a lot of the chemical manufacturers from each other. This type of technology is what made Amazon so famous, right? With their literally data analytics, understanding how to set up their fulfillment centers, and then automating it with robots, and all those robots have sensors that are figuring out where they go and all these things. So it's not like this is a new technology. It's just taking something and applying it to the cannabis space. And I think that at the end of the day is going to be so beneficial for the industry as a whole, right? Because what that's going to do is it's going to increase margins, and hopefully that cascade effect will lower the price of raw materials, which is the THC right now. And so now when I go into a dispensary, instead of being like, oh, I would love to have a couple THC beverages, right? And right now I go in and it's like, okay, well, that's going to be $10 for a 12-ounce can. And you're like, well, that's just a little steep, right? Like it's just some seltzer water. I'm probably going to have to drink 2 of them. Like,
Right.
right.
You know, and Kellan, man, what you said brings up such another interesting topic. And that is like how you said there's existing technologies that are being applied to this industry. And I mean, the other day I tweeted, and I truly believe this, that like, I believe that cannabis is going to be one of the, if not the main industry catalyst for incoming entrepreneurs. And what I mean by that is exactly what you said, right? You've got professionals in different disciplines, and you've got entrepreneurs that add so much value in different ways. And once cannabis becomes more accepted, when it becomes fully legal, there's just going to be so many different entrants into the space doing so many innovative and cool things. I mean, look at us, for example. We're podcasting. I'm not a grower. I'm not a farmer, right? But the fact that I have a certain skill set, y'all have a certain skill set, we can apply it to this new industry. That is what is just super exciting to me, man.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember talking to someone at a trade show back in 2018, even earlier in the space, and we were just chatting, and I was like, "Well, what got you into the space?" And they just, as cold faced as possibly, looked at me and they go, "My skill set is infinitely more valuable in this space than in any other space currently." Right. And they were coming from big pharma previously, right? And so it's just like no, like I literally am so much more valuable here because I have this skill set that no one else in this space has, but everyone else in this other space has, right? And so I could not agree with you more. And I think that what Peter Thiel maybe even said it, where like you don't want to go into like a super hyper competitive space. Like you don't want to try to make the next Coca-Cola right now.
Right.
Like probably a really terrible business entrepreneurial idea, right? But going into a space where it's new, it's emerging, and you can literally separate yourself from the pack instantly. I mean, that's the most attractive entrepreneurial opportunity you can think of.
100%. Yeah. Bryan, do you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, like we're very excited about this technology because we've seen kind of recent conversations how quickly it's coming. But from the large operator standpoint, like consistency across state lines and wanting a reliable product is going to be something that's expected of the industry.
Right.
Like what Kellan said, when you have a Coke, like you expect it to taste like Coke, you expect it to look like Coke. If it doesn't, instantly your mind's like, something's wrong here. That's the issue right now in the cannabis space is you can go in dispensaries across state lines and kind of get like a different experience the entire time. We're mildly similar in some areas. And that's the one part about the sensors. It helps for reliability and consistency. And I think that'll also help the consumer because then they can feel, okay, I take this out for 3 hours, but I felt for 2, this is my thing. And then next time you take it, if it knocks you out for 8, you're like, whoa, I'm done with these edibles. And sometimes when people have a off-putting experience, they're less likely to try again. And we don't want that to happen, especially right now where the products are still being flushed out from a consistency standpoint and reliability standpoint. We want more adoption. For that to happen, we need operators to kind of adopt this technology faster. And it's only a matter of time before it's mandatory. And those are some of the conversations that we're having. It's just kind of helping our clients be very forward thinking in their approach, understanding, okay, like right now it's not mandatory, but if you get in front of the wave, you're going to do a better job here. You're going to drive margin. It'll return on investment in 6 months. And in 2 years, you're crushing your competition.
Absolutely. Yeah. The regulation's inevitable. Might as well just be operating best in class and doing all the, the right things to ensure, like you said, Bryan, that the product remains consistent, right? Because that's really where operators are going to have their feet held to the fire. is consistency in products, and that's going to be in every space. And in the three categories, you're going to have, the health and wellness space, you're going to have the adult use, and then you're going to have the pharmaceutical and the medical, right? So and especially within the medical and pharmaceutical, that is where consistency is going to be top priority, right?
Right. And all these sensors are being used very common now. They're common practice in the oil and gas and the pharmaceutical and food and bev. So it's inevitable, as there's more adoption with some of these outside industry people coming in, they'll look to some techniques that they're comfortable with, and likely that'll mean, PAT.
Mm-hmm. So, what have you guys heard in terms of trends on the extraction side? I know that, there's people that swear by CO2 extraction over ethanol, for different, end use cases, end formulations, right? Just depends on what the end product is. But what are you seeing in terms of the future of extraction?
We're seeing, as far as the conversations in terms of facilities that people are interested in building and facilities that we've been a part of that are successful and looking to kind of scale into the next phase of growth. All of those facilities currently, if you're in the cannabis space, those individuals are relying on hydrocarbon. Um, I mean, I've run a bunch of CO2 labs. I'm very, very familiar with the technology. And there's a lot of, like, from a marketing perspective, there's a bunch of different like handles that people have jumped onto and kind of used to separate their CO2 product from the pack. But from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is consumers are speaking with their purchasing, and they're purchasing BHO concentrates. If they're a habitual dabber, you're not. It's very, very rare to meet a dabber. I've never met one. I'll be honest, that even dabs any CO2 products, right? And so anyone that's dabbing, which is, if you are someone running a concentrate company and you're looking to generate consistent revenue, you probably should target the habitual cannabis dabber as your kind of core revenue generation, right? Because they're the ones that they're going to come back week after week and buy a gram of concentrates no matter what, right? Like, they're the habitual dabber. And so they all prefer, hands down, live resin or another BHO product like sugar, or even a cheap shatter if they're tight on money for that week, right? And so and then with edibles, there's a lot of ethanol distillate that's being used to generate edibles. But then I've even seen more of the better edibles, like Wild, right? Like my favorite edible company, they are a full spectrum oil that they use to make their edible, and it gives the user a much more at least me, it gives me a much more enjoyable experience with like the full spectrum of
Of
terpenes.
course, same here. Yeah.
Right? Versus like a distillate, it's like, I don't know, it's weird. Like, I'm in a different headspace, right? Like,
Yeah.
if it's a edible.
No, and I'm the same way. And you know what? Actually, that's a relevant segue, because like with Delta 8, have you guys heard of, I'm sure you've heard of Delta 8, but like Colorado, Kellan, I'm interested to hear your perspective, of course, because Colorado's adult use, but I'm seeing that Delta 8 is popular, of course, among the non-adult use states, the hemp states, like Texas. Everybody's talking about Delta 8.
Yeah.
And I've smoked
That's
it.
not legal.
Right, exactly. And I've tried Delta 8, and look, I'm not discriminating. I'm all for cannabis overall. But but to your point, like, I do enjoy the full entourage effect with, the secondary compounds, the flavonoids, the terpenes, as opposed to just an isolated cannabinoid, which Delta 8 is, right?
Yeah.
What have you, like, have you guys had any guests on that talked about Delta 8? Have you guys tried it? Like, what are your thoughts on Delta 8?
We have had a guest on. His name was Dr. Matt Moore. He's a pharmaceutical chemist for a company called Boniva, and they are the only FDA approved facility to manufacture cannabinoids, right? So they are a straight pharma manufacturing facility for cannabinoids. And I'll let Bryan Bryan has a little more experience with the Delta 8 products, but I'll give you my take-home message that from conversations with operators in the space that are looking to synthesize it from CBD, and the conversation I had with with Matt was, at the end of the day, this is very different type of product than anything else the industry has ever seen, because everything else the industry has been exposed to has been humans taking what nature has made and just concentrating it and then delivering it to humans. What is going on now is we are taking something that nature doesn't make. There's no Delta 8 plants out there. And we are literally synthesizing a new molecule. And when you go through and you start to mix a bunch of chemicals together, and you don't have a like a $20 million pharmaceutical lab, it gets really risky to ensure the safety of that product to the end user, right? Like there are minor products that are going on from the synthesis. I mean, the majority of Delta 8 right now is being made by taking CBD, dissolving in heptane, which is a concentrated form of gasoline, right? Heptane, and then adding p-toluene sulfonic acid, right? And mixing that up for a couple hours. And then you have Delta 8, and you're supposed to get all the p-toluene sulfonic acid out, the other minors, and all these other things. And this being done by companies that are looking to generate extra revenue streams because potentially they're in a tight financial spot. I just don't put a lot of trust in the ability for them not to cut corners, right? In those kind of situations. And so my take home message is that, like, I just personally, I wouldn't try very many Delta 8 products. I mean, we talked to some people about it, and there are a few trusted labs out there that are doing it the right way. But it's just like, you're gonna have to do some serious homework. And Bryan and Bryan and myself did do some serious homework, and we chatted with some really respected individuals in the space, and that's actually how we found a product. And I'll let Bryan kind of talk about that product because he's got more experience with it, and he went through that due diligence process after our conversations.
So that's tough, Kellan, right? There's a couple different points that I want to kind of fight back on. It shows that the consumer really wants psychoactive products, right?
Right.
Like, they don't really, and when I say they don't really care, some people ask me, have you heard of this brand? No. They're selling this product. It'll get me high. My friend told me about it. Do you think I should try it? I don't know. What is it? Oh, it's this, right? And then it turns out it's Delta 8, and I was like, well, some kind of concerns there. They're like, but can I get it here in New York? Yes. Is it illegal? Likely. Will it get me high? Yes. And that's where I think the conversation starts to come, where people are very trusting. You can buy it on the internet. Unfortunately, people are like, well, it must be regulated, approved. The people are probably taking precautions just like the other products. And I think that's a misconception of what's happening. In regards to the actual product, I have tried it. I liked getting high. It felt great, right? And here in New York, it's not the easiest products to come by from a purchasing on the internet standpoint. But the next day, I felt super cloudy. My brain felt like I had cobwebs in it. Like it was harder for me to turn it on the next day, and kind of gave me like a weed hangover, where it was odd for me. And it was one where, like, I liked it, but I'd likely would go away from it in the future. And I wondered, maybe it was the product, the experience, how it was. I ended up taking another one a week later just to see, and I felt like I had a different experience. I felt like I wasn't as ripped as I was that first time. So I was wondering then about the reliability and the consistency standpoint. So I think the main message is,
or what else you consumed in addition to that.
Like, there goes the anxiety level, like through the roof, right? Like I'm consuming all these other products to kind of like calm down the anxiety. I mean, when you've got all these farmers with CBD and they're looking for an outlet to return on their investment, of course Delta 8's going to pop up. It's a likely thought in the process, right? I've got this product, it's not selling, nobody knows what CBD really is or what it can do, but I can convert it into Delta 8 and sell it for a huge multiple. Sounds like a no-brainer, and it makes sense, right? Like, until it gets stopped, it's going to continue to grow, and the only way to really combat that, it's kind of like the illicit market, the only way to really combat that is kind of either do some educational stuff, which will be really hard to do, regulate it, also going to be really hard to do, or allow the states to come online faster, sell real products with real regulations.
That's the thing, right? It's like time is the ultimate deciding factor for what they should do. When I say they, like the people who oppose Delta 8, because is it in their best interest to put money and time and effort and resources into removing Delta 8 when eventual legalization could happen, right? It's just kind of fascinating. And to both your points, it just shows the appetite for the psychoactive properties, Kellan, I want to ask you: is it only synthetically converted? Like, is there a way to naturally produce? I guess not, right? It's all
I mean,
it's
I don't want to say no, but like I haven't seen it, right? Like I
okay.
haven't seen it in literature. I've looked at so many chromatograms of like I've tested just an insane amount of different cannabis on an HPLC. And so I've seen like all these different chromatograms and like talked to all these different people. And I mean, heavily involved in the scientific community. And like I had to like when we were, it's funny because like the Delta 8 thing emerged, right? And then people were talking about like, oh no, like it's like your daytime high, like you know what I mean? Like you it's your day rider, right? If you're like a really heavy person that's like always got a vape pen in your mouth, then like you should just be vaping your Delta 8 during the day, and you go your Delta 8 at night, and you won't be so weird in the afternoon. And I was like, okay, like I want to know like why that is. And so my thought was like it's a binding efficiency, right? Like Delta 8 doesn't bind as well to your CB1 receptor in your brain as Delta 9. And like went into the primary literature, could not find, like it was like just so hard to find any information on Delta 8 in the primary literature. And I was like, okay, well, like clearly like there's just not a lot of information out there on it in general. So it's not, I would say it's not naturally occurring, but you never know, right? With CRISPR out there and our ability to control enzymes and DNA at this point, like we're able to clone a lamb in the 90s. I'm not going to say we're not able to make cannabis, Delta 8 cannabis too, right?
Right, right.
Right. But right now, nature doesn't do it. I think man is going to have to be involved to facilitate that for sure.
Yeah.
But like, how do like when the word gets spread on Delta 8, especially from peer to peer, the question isn't about legal or not. It's solely about will it get me high, will it not, and can I get it, right? That's the constant question, because people don't really care, and there's such a misnomer with the educational level because there's bazillion cannabinoids. It's hard for all of us to keep track of all of them that are coming out, let alone ones that are not really naturally occurring. It's really, really complicated. So for the average consumer who just wants to take an edible but can't get it because New York has kind of slow to the party, they're like, all right, well, my buddy Charlie handed me this. He says, like, hi, do I know the difference of what's inside? Not really.
Yeah, it's funny because my wife's sister's boyfriend, we were all at a family gathering, and I I mentioned Delta 8. I think I even had a Delta 8 product from a guest that I had, and it was good. It wasn't bad, and he really liked it, you know. And the next day, I said the next time I see him, he's got a Delta 8 pen, and he's like, "Yeah, I found one, man. I got one at the gas station." And I was like, "Oh
Oh
no,
boy.
not the."
Oh boy.
I was like, "Okay." Smoked out day, but I was like, but don't. I was like, I'll hook you up with some. Like, I'll get you a good, good product at least that I've sourced and I've vetted from a guest. But gas station is probably not the best place to
Probably
purchase
not.
that. No.
Nope.
Did it work though? Did he say that it worked and it got him high?
Yeah, he didn't have any issues. I mean, everything was cool. You know what I mean? So you never know. It basically, when you go to a gas station or buy on Amazon, you just don't know what you're getting. Is the point, right? So, but yeah, it's just fascinating to me, and I think really it's the ultimate loophole of 2020 in this industry.
Right, and especially with CBD being so abundant and there not being enough buyers for it, I mean, it's natural to look for another outlet for revenue opportunities. And I think this was, won't be the last one, right? There'll be another one that kind of stems from this that we didn't think about. That's like, oh, that's smart, right? Like they had to they grew CBD in absolute abundance, and now they're trying to pivot in another direction.
Right. Exactly. And that just again speaks to the testament of how amazing this plant is, you know.
Incredible.
I was recently in New Mexico. I think that's when I recorded the podcast with y'all on the dime, and my business partner, who is a master cultivator, I didn't even know this, that if you wait until, like, if you wait to harvest the buds of the plant once it buds out and the flowers are there, the buds and the flowers literally go back into the plant. They don't fall off or die or anything like that. Did you know that? They just like disappear.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
So, and I'm bringing it up because, like, again, how amazing this plant is. Like, no waste, so many therapeutic properties, so many applications for industrial hemp, and yet, like, the buds themselves just come out and then they go back in. They just disappear. There's like that one harvest time. It's so strange, man. But
Such a beautiful plant.
I know we're learning every day about it. Let's switch back to cannabis markets. we're all part of the MSO gang. We're active on Twitter, following the different MSOs and the industry leaders. So, and of course, you guys have had guests on the space that are on the business side, right? So, from your perspective, what are some of the core competencies that companies should bring to the table when operating in the space and to grow market share?
I'll go first to summarize it. Kind of like the same theme is have a really forward approach and really dissect everything you're doing and figure out. It's really important to work on the day to day and exactly what you need to do to kind of continue to operate. But the most important thing that I want to preach is that the forward thinking approach. Have somebody on your team that's constantly looking out, that's researching, that's reading everything they can, and understanding of the direction they need to be in the future, because this industry is evolving so fast. And if you're not consistently putting resources towards a forward thinking approach, you kind of end up being complacent. And when you're complacent, especially in the speed of way this industry moves, you might fall behind. And in that regards, you might miss the opportunity, which is kind of crazy to say, but there's still a chance that could really happen. So I guess for me, it's a forward active approach. Work with people outside of your inner core. I think sometimes the inner circle of that bias is such a burdening problem where you speak to 3 people every single day. You're pretty much the sum of those 3 ideas. So get out, speak to other people, speak to industry experts, ask consultants what they think. That's what they get paid to do, is to help put you in a position to succeed forward. And if you're asking them and then they tell you, likely they're not telling you to hurt your feelings. They're telling you to help you. That's what they get paid to do. So I think, putting your pride aside and working with third parties in order to understand that they're here to help support you and get you on the road to success.
Yeah, I think that was well said. I would just add, in my opinion, I think development is probably what I would say, and that's internal development and having a long timeline from that development in terms of, this is a very different space. You can't go hire a PhD in cannabis botany out of Stanford and be like, have a team of your scientists. I want the best cannabis plant out there, right? Like they didn't do cannabis botany, right? Like you have to, there's just not traditional means to have this pool of talent available for your company, right? So focusing on internal development, that means sending your employees to trade shows and workshops and educating, right? And having that aspect of your team constantly looking forward and educating and learning to then deliver that information to your team, right? Because you want to look at this as a 20, 30, 40-year plan. If you're a big MSO, right, and going to be around for a really long time, you need to develop your team internally so that you're going to have a strong leadership team in 10 years, so that if you're an executive level now, all of that equity that you have in the company is going to be worth something in 20 years, because the company should still be around. So you want to develop that internal core competency and have a really, really long perspective on your goals, right? I think the biggest mistake we've seen is just a lot of people getting into the industry and being like, well, I'm just here because I want to make a lot of money. I don't, if someone wants to buy me next year, I'll sell, but I don't know if that's really my goal, right? So like, not even having any short or long-term goals. They just kind of showed up because they heard there was money in the pot, and they're just here to kind of collect their due. And so I think that's been one of the biggest mistakes and that we've seen. And the way to address that is to have a really long-term perspective, and also develop your employees and develop your internal team as much as you can.
Yeah, no, that's sound advice, and that has happened so much. I mean, I've seen that play out in various states where you've got these people that come in and they're just looking for the money grab, right? They're acquiring, they're raising capital, and yet, like they're sitting on all these assets and all this money, because the industry is still figuring itself out, right? I mean, this is a long-term game, like you both have said. And I think it's very sound advice, Bryan, from your perspective, again, with the theme of this episode being forward is forward. And Kellan, human capital is key. And grooming those teams to be successful in the future, and then having those goals in mind where you're hyper focused on them to succeed. And I think that's great advice. And it's something that we're seeing with the top performing MSOs play out, right? So I want to give you guys both the opportunity. Tell me about your company, Eighth Revolution, and also the Dime podcast.
Sure. So Eighth Revolution provides services from capital to cannabinoid, and what we do is we handhold every chain of the way through, and really we primarily focus on working with either operators that have a license and want to kind of to position that to new states, or they're looking for a facility to kind of grow it out, and anywhere in between any of those services. So for us, we're super multifaceted, and really we drive home on optimization efficiency. We are pretty aggressive with asking every question to uncover every single rock, because what we want to do is just break it down to its straight core and figure out what we can do to provide you to put you on the best path forward. And sometimes that involves kind of asking uncomfortable questions, which we're very known to do, to figure out, maybe we should really analyze what you think right here. You think it's a strong spot, but let's kind of uncover this and think if we tweak this and add this, these two combined can multiply to really help drive home the bottom line. So I think for us, at its core, we're problem solvers. We're multifaceted in any approach because the industry's needs are so dynamic between states and the regulations and all these other opportunities. So I think for us, we're super flexible in that regard. And Kellan, you want to add any of those things?
Yeah, I'll just touch on the podcast. I think you did a great job with our elevator speech there, so I'll let that be.
He's done that before. That was spot on, man. Well said.
Yeah.
Well, people, what's Eighth Revolution? I don't understand. What is it? Like, you guys smoke weed? It's like, well, not exactly.
No. So the Dime's our podcast, and originally it was just a means to have conversations with industry stakeholders and create a platform for Bryan and myself to practice these conversations and educate ourselves, as well as just highlight some of the tremendous work that's being done by a lot of really, really smart individuals in the space. And it's been a really fun time, and it's been awesome to be able to kind of have that loose framework associated with kind of what the podcast is, because it's given us the opportunity to have individuals like yourself on, all the way to individuals that work at pharmaceutical labs, to individuals that are writers for or editors for
Seeking Alpha
national publications, right? So we get to touch all of the different aspects of the industry and provide a really general educational opportunity for people out there, and it's been an absolute blast, right?
Yeah, it's great work that you guys are doing, and like I said, I can't tell you enough how much fun I had on your podcast, The Dime. Totally recommend it for anyone listening. Check them out. You guys are on Spotify and like all the streaming platforms, right?
Yeah, we're on all of them. We appreciate the kind words, and we had a fun conversation. I was itching to kind of release it sooner rather than later, and I felt bad kind of like, all right, we have to wait the week, Bryan.
No worries, man. And when it does come out, we'll be sure, of course, to share it on our end as well. And I'm hoping at some point we can all get together and smoke a joint and do this in person. It's, you know what I mean? Maybe when we get back to some normalcy, we'll see each other at an event or a trade show.
Definitely.
We were looking forward to it. It seems like it's happening sooner rather than later, which is really exciting, right? We're on the other side of it, hopefully, and we're moving back towards it. And in the last year, there's been a ton of changes, especially in our space. So it's going to be fun to kind of get back there, catch up, see what everyone's doing, and get ready to work.
Absolutely. You guys can introduce me to the trade show world, because I'm a little late to that space. So
you'll be a natural.
Yeah, definitely. You won't have a problem.
Awesome. Hey, well, where can people find y'all's website and social media channels if they want to follow you and learn more?
My Twitter handle is BryanFields24. Kellan's is now Kellan Finney, which makes it rather easy to find him. Before it was really complicated. Our website is...
What was it? Dabmaster33315?
It's hard to remember. It's underscores, initials, letters.
There's an acronym. There's some numbers in there.
and then on social, we're the number 8threv.com, and pretty much aggressive on all the platforms. And the one thing that I did want to share was, if people are interested or kind of intimidated with where we are in the space, the best way to go forward is to kind of just put your foot in the door and start learning somewhere. And the one thing that we are most proud of is our monthly playbook we put together, and it's 28 pages and it's dense, right? It's not intended to be consumed in its entirety. If you want, go for it. But it's there with a variety of different levels for people who are interested in marketing, overall top level summary. If you're looking for the financing, if you're looking for, the QA, QC, if you're looking for trends. There's an enormous section on kind of analysis on trends, on where we see different opportunities based on search trends and pricing. There's things for everyone there. So I think if you're looking for information, just want to get your foot in the door, hop onto our website, sign up. We've made it free. Why? I'm not really sure, if we're going to be honest. The people who funded our company are furious with us that I've refused to monetize it. But I think for us, we want to get the word out there. We want to share with everyone what's going on and keep everyone informed, because at the end of the day, it's up to all of us to do our part to help the industry move forward.
Right. Knowledge is power and forward is forward. Isn't that right, guys?
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Hey, well, let's make this a regular thing, guys. Like, you know, we're all, like we said, very active on Twitter, and we're seeing the news come out and trends and everything changing and shaping and evolving. So as that continues to happen, let's make this like maybe a monthly or bi-monthly thing where we come together and just talk about and riff on different things happening.
I love it. Yeah, it'd be great. Appreciate it.
Cool. Right on, guys. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us on.
Yes. And thank you all for listening. Bye.